Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or search desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are talking about responding to night wakes. Now, I get this question a lot, right? Is it possible to over-respond to night wakes? Or sort of related, like, am I supposed to respond to every single solitary teeny noise they make? Like, what is the balance there? What does that look like in practice? And I get this a lot in my newborn sleep class, but I also get this a lot from parents of older babies, right? Trying to figure out, is there ever a time that we should pause or we should give them some space to see if they'll settle on their own? And I think this is a really great question because we live in a world where almost everything you hear about sleep is non-responsive, right? It's saying don't respond, coming from that sleep training cultural perspective. And so when you want to respond, but you're kind of grappling with this, am I over-responding? Should I pause? Can I ever pause? When does it make sense to? I think it's a really important concept to think about. So first, let's begin this conversation with, of course, a baby or toddler or young child signaling for their parents in whatever way they do that, you should respond to, right? A baby asking for support should always be responded to. That is the baseline. That's a given. Where I'd like to take this conversation is past that, right? Like, children have needs. We need to meet those needs. But what about some of the gray areas, right? And I think that there are a lot of gray areas, right? And part of that is because babies make a lot of noises in their sleep. My goodness, newborns especially, they make so many sleep noises, funny breathing noises, grunts, and even older babies can make little cries and little noises in their sleep that are not signaling for us, right? Those are just part of their sleep noises. And how do you know what's what, right? And like, to a certain extent, you have to learn, right? You have to observe and you have to experiment, right? Because I don't want a new parent getting up, messing with their baby every single solitary time they make a teeny tiny noise. For one, you're probably waking your baby up. And for two, you're certainly taking away from your sleep. And for three, like, that's gonna kind of make you really anxious and drive you a little off the wall. Like, so there's an element of getting to know your baby and their sleep noises and figuring out what's a signal for support and what's just noises in their sleep. And I think part of learning that is realizing that you might get it wrong. And that's okay, right? Like, it is okay to get it wrong as you start to learn your baby and the noises they make in their sleep and what is a ask for help and what is not. Because we're not going to always get it right. And so to not be so afraid of getting it wrong, right? I think that's pretty much true for everything in parenting, right? Like, there's an element of experimentation. We're learning on the job. And we're going to learn from when we get it wrong. And we're going to learn from when we get it right. So learning that foundation of like baby sleep noises, that's one piece. And the next is that sometimes in that learning, or even once you have a pretty good grasp on your baby's noises, the idea of a pause, right? And I will tell parents sometimes, just like take 3 really slow, deep breaths. Okay, now what is your baby doing at the end of those breaths? There's nothing magical about 3 breaths, right? I like to say take some deep breaths because that's calming to your nervous system. So if your baby ends up escalating, you've already been calming yourself down, which means you can go in a calmer state. But if we have a baby that wasn't signaling for you, often you take 3, 5 breaths and they're already resettled, right? They were just making noises in their sleep. And so sometimes that pause can be really lovely as you're learning and you're kind of figuring things out, or when you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not like a me need, right? And so we'll just take that moment to give them that space. And as babies get older and, you find that sometimes they're actually able to resettle, even if you can tell their eyes are awake and you think they're at that point where they're linking sleep cycles, then that pause can be really interesting because sometimes babies will get to the end of the sleep cycle, they'll wake up, they'll be like, and if you respond right away, you're already running, right? But they're going, and then they wiggle around and they're back to sleep. I'm like, did they really need you then? Probably not, right? And so that's another time where it can make sense to think about, are there parts of the night where my baby might fully wake up, like if you have a baby monitor or that you're in the same room with them and you can see they are, and they're making a little bit of noise, but the odds are very high that they're just kind of getting comfy and are going to go back to sleep. And if those odds are very high, then giving them a little space to do that can be really nice as part of their learning to settle, right? Because they're not stressed, right? They're not necessarily signaling you. They're just making some noises and resettling. Now, the flip side to that is it does not make sense to pause and give them that space if the odds are very low that they're going to resettle, right? Especially if you have a baby who escalates very quickly. And this, again, part of learning when to give a little space and learning when to be boom, gotta move quickly. Because if you try to give space to a baby who's very unlikely to be able to resettle and they're escalating super fast, then suddenly you have a stressed baby. And it's much harder to resettle a stressed baby. So not only do you need to do the resettling, but it's going to take you a lot longer. It's going to be more disruptive to baby's sleep. It's probably going to be more grating on your nerves. It's going to take, the whole process is going to be harder because you can't resettle back to sleep when you're stressed out, right? True for you, true for baby. So I'll often talk with parents, I'm like, is there a time in the night or specific wakes where, you have pretty good odds that if you give them a little space, they'll resettle? That's when you can pause for this baby. But if it's okay, after midnight, they never resettle, or I've seen them do it twice, then just go respond and get everybody back to sleep as fast as possible, right? Because we're not trying to avoid responding to a need here. That's sleep training culture, right? Even if we were trying to make a change in how we were supporting to sleep, we'd still be responding. We'd still be there with your baby. So we're not trying to ignore real needs. We're just trying to give a little space when odds are high. They're not actually signaling for support. They're just making those silly baby sleep noises or squawking, fussing a bit as they get comfortable again. And so I hope this gives you some food for thought, right? If this resonates, if this feels right for your baby, run with it. If you're like, Kim, I don't know if this feels right, then of course, don't do something that doesn't feel right. This isn't a must do. This is just a nice way of thinking about it. If you're in that place where you're kind of grappling, are we over responding? Does my baby have any capacity to resettle? Are all of these noises they make at night actual needs, actual requests for support? Then this is where this learning, this observing, this experimenting, this pause can be really helpful. As long as we keep in mind, right, that this isn't a uniform thing throughout the night, right? Like usually if your baby's going to be able to resettle more easily, most of the time, generally speaking, that's earlier in the night when sleep pressure is higher and becomes less likely as the night goes on and sleep pressure becomes lower. So really being strategic, because overnight, we want to get everyone back to sleep as fast as possible, right? That's part of how we get baby the best quality sleep, but also you the best quality sleep in the middle of, what's hard. It's hard to have our sleep disrupted by babies in modern society. And so I think we can waste a lot of time and energy and lose a lot of sleep trying to do things in the middle of the night without being strategic and that prolong wake-ups. So I hope this gives you something to think about, resonates, maybe feels something worth trying, or maybe it's already something that you're doing and it's nice to hear it highlighted in a more sort of sleep supportive way. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.